Hey, Clemson family, we are going to take a look at Clemson's linebackers in this episode of the Supreme Alway podcast, along with getting into some previews of the Syracuse game, which will be on the road, probably another tough one as far as the road games go, and Wake Forest as well, which will be coming to Death Valley.
I'm Daniel Shirley, the always dreaded trip to the Carrier Dome. Is it still the Carrier Dome? I don't think it even is the Carrier Dome anymore, but the always dreaded trip to Syracuse coming up for the Tigers this season.
All right, so I got to remember sometime while you're talking, I got to look up who sponsors the stadium now. I'm Bill Zimmerman. Welcome to the Supreme Alway podcast. As I mentioned, you can follow us on several social media services. Twitter is where we do the most updates between episodes. We're on Instagram, we're on Threads, we're on Facebook at Clemson Kickoff. And our homepage is clemsonkickoff.com. You can catch a lot of material there as well, including our archived episodes where you don't have to look at our faces, which is probably a plus, right? So let's get let's get into the linebackers. In the previous episode, we talked about the defensive line and how good that defensive tackle room is in particular. But a lot of people are looking at Barrett Carter, looking at Jeremiah Trotter, calling them the best linebacker duo in the country, or at least among them, and certainly have a chance to be right up there with pairings like Ben Bulwer, Kendall Joseph. Go back a little farther, Stephon Anthony. I'm blanking. I had the name before we started. Save me. Stephon Anthony and
You're blanking me as well. So,
oh man, see, I'm contagious.
I
I'll
was
even
going back to Levon Kirkland and those kind of guys. You
yeah.
threw me off there for a second.
Tony Stewart,
Tony
Stephon
Stewart.
Anthony and Tony Stewart. Then
Tony
you look,
Stewart. Yes.
quite a recruiting pair. And yeah, then you get back to that bunch of Levon Kirkland, Ed McDaniel, Mr. Inside, Mr. Outside. You also had some good guys in that group: Ashley Shepard, Wayne Simmons, Mike Barber, John Johnson. Just a run of linebackers, all who played in the NFL. All that group that I just mentioned played in the NFL. You haven't seen as much of the NFL success out of Clemson's linebackers during the Brent Venables era. Maybe that's going to be able to change with the Wes Goodwin era. I'm not saying that, he's a better position coach, but they certainly have done very well with recruiting. We'll also get into a couple of freshmen as we keep talking and some guys who are commits for next year. But led by Carter and Trotter, the latter being the son of a former NFL All-Pro, you have to feel like this group is looking really, really good and helping contribute to a really solid front seven.
Yeah, I don't know what you can say enough about Barrett Carter and Jeremiah Trotter. I just the two of those guys, what they bring to this team, playmaking ability, and I think we expected that from Barrett last year, right? Going into the season. I thought Jeremiah was a little bit of a surprise throughout the season. Maybe there weren't as many expectations about him, but a couple of games into that season last year, you thought, okay, yeah, I see why they went after this guy in recruiting. He is fast, he's physical, he hits hard, and he knows the game. You can tell that he's got the mental part down because he's two steps ahead. So with those two guys, you really have a great start at linebacker. I thought Wade Woodaz was as good of a freshman as they
Yep.
had on the team last year
Sure.
and caught me off guard, to be honest, with what he was able to bring to this team. I thought he was a developmental guy, and maybe a couple of years down the line he'll be a James Skalski or one of those kind of guys. But no, he really contributed last year. Now, unlike the defensive line where we talked about in the previous episode, depth, there's not much depth here. So that's the one problem with the linebackers. We know about the depth issues here. And that's going to be a big key to this season. If Trotter and Carter and Woodaz can stay healthy and play a lot, then this group has got a chance to really kind of get to the top of college football, but they've got to stay healthy.
Yeah, it's almost like the defensive tackles and that the room at the top is so stacked and so very good, but then also like the defensive ends where you've got to get some young guys some playing time early in the season. You got to get them in against Charleston Southern. You've got to get them in against Florida Atlantic. Hopefully you get them in against Duke, right? And even face a quality quarterback against Riley Leonard of the Blue Devils. But you do want to start looking at, all right, can Woodaz cross train a little bit, know other positions, be able to step in should he have to in an emergency? Let's not say the evil I word, right? What about D. Creighton? What can he contribute out of the gate as a true freshman? He was there during the spring. So was Jamal Anderson Jr., another guy with NFL bloodlines, even though his father played on offense instead of defense. He certainly at least knows what it takes uh, in the meeting room on the practice field to gather what he's got to pull together and be able to contribute. I think he's a little less physical, a little lighter load than Creighton brings. So that is one edge that I think people are talking about with Creighton being able to contribute a little more quickly. And then you got another guy, kind of NFL bloodlines, Kobe McLeod, brother of Ray McLeod, quite a bit younger brother, also out of the Tampa area, like Woodaz. So he's coming in, tested against good high school competition, redshirted last year, and has every opportunity now to maybe be the top backup at the linebacker spot. What might complicate that the most would be if they play a lot of 4-2-5 with only two linebackers on the field and Woodaz being the primary backup.
They might have to do that, to be honest. And in some games, depending on the other team's offense, it probably is the best plan of attack. I mean, if you're playing North Carolina and they're going to try to throw it around, then yeah, you want to have as many defensive backs on the field as possible. Same way with, trying to corral Florida State's weapons. It's probably better to have those guys on the field in the secondary. But I think Woodaz showed, Bill, to be honest, I think he could play that hybrid role that we've seen Clemson have so much success with in the past. I'm not saying he's Isaiah Simmons. I'm not saying that.
Who is?
I don't know they've ever had a better athlete than Isaiah Simmons play in this program,
Nope.
but he can play that role. Dorian, that Dorian O'Daniel played, that Isaiah played. So there are some opportunities for him to do that as well, and we'll see how that works with this defensive staff. But I think they're going to have to be creative because of some lack of depth in the linebacker group. And does that get Kobe some extra time? Does it get Creighton some extra time? Probably Anderson plays a little bit more than he would have if there was a little more depth there. That could be there as well. So, but I think they're going to have to be creative with the linebacker safety kind of a group to see how that plays out.
A lot of experience in the safety room, and that may be playing a part in this as well, do you think? Nope, you're on mute.
I didn't
There
mute.
you go.
I didn't. I say, yeah, I've got a bit of a cold, and I don't want to subject people to that. But yeah, I do think so. I think with what they've got in that safety group, and it starts with Makuba. We'll talk about the safeties later on in another episode. But I mean, Mickens is back there. They've got some guys who they could get on the field and play a kind of a nickel, kind of a hybrid role, and get the job done. So I think you're going to see a lot of those guys get used in different roles this year. I think the best thing is that they're not going to use Makuba at cornerback. He's a safety / nickel. I mean, I don't think it's good for him to be playing corner. They tried it last year and it didn't work. But I do think they will need some versatility from those guys going through this season.
Yeah, and I don't want the experience at safety to come across like it's an indictment of Woodaz being young. I think last year,
Nope.
probably in coverage situations, pardon me, he was probably better in pure coverage than a lot of freshmen who have come in at safety. I would think Landon Zanders, I would think Tanner Muse, I would maybe even think Jalen Phillips, who's a guy that I like quite a bit and came in with a good bit of size at safety as a freshman, should be able to play close to the line and maybe handle some of that linebacker type duties when they want to go with five defensive backs. I think it seems to me to be more of a, hey, let's try not to have three guys on the field all that often, because if one is unavailable for whatever reason, who's stepping up next? And especially until you get past the week 2 and week 3 games where you should be able to get some guys some reps, find out what they're made of, see how much quick progress they can make in addressing their weaknesses. Then maybe you can loosen up, play a little more 4-3, maybe even some 3-3. But I think you're going to see Wood as kind of in if they go with that 4-2-5 as their base, I do think you're going to see Wood as cross train at both spots. And there was a lot of success last year with Barrett Carter when he moved across the field out of, when Trenton Simpson got hurt, he had early in the season replaced Trenton Simpson in what was called the Sam spot, and Trenton moved over to the Will. I love Trenton Simpson, but I think Barrett Carter, frankly, was better in both spots on the field, to tell you the truth. And I really love his instincts. They both have superb physical skills and able to, come up with plays wherever they are on the field. But I think Carter was just a little more complete at Sam, and especially more so at Will. And that led to the permanent change down the stretch where Trenton Simpson went back to where he had played as a freshman and sophomore, and Carter stayed in that weak side spot moving forward. So if they can get Wood as that functional in more than one spot, it's going to mean a lot of good things for the linebacking core.
Yeah, I think so. And again, I think Trotter and Woodaz were two of the pleasant surprises for me last season, and that has to help them going forward. I think Trotter has become a real leader on this team. Barrett Carter already was, and those are two of the best young men on the team. Can't wait to see them take another step in that leadership role and see what they can become. You want to see the defense be more consistent, right? What was the big issue with this defense last year? It was inconsistency. They'd have a great quarter and then would be terrible for a quarter. And then they'd have another good quarter and then they'd be lax again in another quarter. And it was game to game, series to series. You just didn't know how well they were going to play. The talent is there for them to be more consistent. I think you'll see that this year. They've got some great leadership with this group, and looking forward to see what these linebackers can become. That first three is as good as anybody in the country. I mean, I'm not going to say they're better than anybody else. I haven't seen all the other linebacking groups in the country, right? We're not even to the start of the season yet, but I think they've got a chance to be as good as anybody in the country.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to watching them play for sure. And we'll get into how they can help stop that Wake mesh in a few minutes. But first, since we previewed Florida State in the last episode, we'll get to the next game on the schedule, which is Syracuse. It's going to be another road trip to Syracuse. Those aren't always as much fun as you would think they would be, would they?
No, they haven't been, right? I mean, you look even 2 years ago, Clemson won the game, but it was a tight one, right? And it was Syracuse had a last second field goal to try to tie the game. And now it was a long field goal. It wasn't a chip shot, but it was missed. Clemson has lost up there before, and there've been a couple of blowouts too, but it feels like it's just a place where you have to go and create your own energy. Kind of like Duke, kind of like Louisville, where you really have to go create your own energy and you have to be ready to play. Look, Clemson plays at Florida State and it's going to be juiced. Clemson plays at NC State, there's going to be juice. I mean, you can feed off of that, but some of these places on the road, you have to be ready to go from the start, and you have to create that excitement and that environment yourself. And Syracuse is one of those places. So, I think Clemson will be ready to play. If they beat Florida State the game before, you would hope there's not a letdown or a lull or any of that kind of stuff. But I think they'll go up there and be ready to play. And Syracuse, look, they might be some hot seat talk this year for Dino and that coaching staff. It seems like it's been consistent the last couple of years that this coaching staff is kind of on the hot seat. But that is a place where you have to go up there and be ready to play.
Yep. And Syracuse, conversely, always seems ready to play Clemson, doesn't it? I mean, no matter who the quarterback is, he seems to have a career game against Clemson. I think they have a lot of success scheming in the trenches on both sides of the ball against Clemson. You saw how they were able to contain Kelly Bryant even before he was hurt in that game, the year that Bryant got them to the playoff in 2017. Something always goes sideways. You saw Lawrence get a concussion and Chase Bryce has to come in and rescue the day, literally. You saw Uyunglele, who had been good all year long, frankly, until that Syracuse game and just got rattled. And,
Was
you know,
awful, awful.
yeah, it was a terrible game for him. Klubnik fortunately came in, ran a sort of dialed back version of the offense. Klubnik managed to protect the football in that game, and they got back out in front, and you could argue even stole a win at home at all of that. So to have to go on the road against Syracuse, you're going to have a more polished Cade Klubnik. You're going to have and I think a more energetic offensive coordinator and a better offensive system under Garrett Riley than we've seen probably at least the last 3 years under both Brandon Streeter and Tony Elliott. Um, Love Tony Elliott. Think he's going to be a better head coach than he was an offensive coordinator. I hope things at Virginia can work out with him, with Kobe Pace, with Malcolm Green. But bottom line, back to Syracuse, you've got to find a way, and Dino Babers always seems to find a way. And this locker room cannot let up, cannot act like, oh, we've got this. This is back to playing Charleston Southern again. For whatever reason, it isn't, and a lot of work to be done. Syracuse actually came into Death Valley undefeated last year.
Right.
Should have known better. Should have known what to expect. Didn't seem to didn't really have they just didn't look prepared. And this year you've got to be prepared, and you've got a long flight on top of that.
You do. And then, I mean, and look, and then, we can transition into the Wake Forest game. That's going to be a tough one as well. I mean, that was one of Clemson's toughest games last year, and it was a shootout, and the offense looked great. It was really the one game where the offense clicked all season, but then the defense fell apart. So,
Well, and I'd argue Florida State for the offense too,
for
but yeah.
sure, for sure.
Yeah.
But I mean, start to finish, there were
Right.
lulls in that Florida State game where the offense really didn't look good, but start to finish, the offense looked good against Wake. But we know how good of a coach Dave Clawson is, and we know what they are going to bring to the table. They may not have the talent that Clemson has or that other teams have, but they are going to be well coached. They are going to play hard. They are not going to beat themselves, and they're going to be ready to play. And so these are two games that, let's say you do beat Florida State and you're sitting there 4-0 and you've beaten Duke. These are two games where you cannot relax and not be focused. And that's going to be on the leadership of this team to keep this team ready to play every week. And I'm not saying there was bad leadership on last year's team, but there were games last year where it felt like they weren't ready to play. They didn't lose, but everything was a struggle last year, except for a couple of games. So that's going to be a big key coming out of that Florida State game, win or lose. Because if you win the game, you don't want to overlook the opponents. If you lose the game, you don't want that to kill your season. We've seen that before, where you lose to Florida State and you throw your hands up and go, okay, our season's over, and then you end up 6-6. That can't happen either.
Right. Hey, you certainly saw it the year Lamar Jackson lost that close game to Clemson, and Louisville just came off the rails, and you could see that he wasn't standing up straight, keeping his head up high. You can't let that kind of thing seep in. I mean, that's an all-world talent right there. That was a guy who had a chance to be a number one pick, needed to show his leadership skills to make that happen and keep that team propped up. At least visibly, the moments that the cameras caught him, it didn't look that way. You don't want that to seep into Dabo Swinney's program. I don't think it has. I do think on some level, though, this team has not always played 60 minutes, has not always taken an opponent seriously out of the gate. I mentioned the last episode about that Florida State game. They were in control of that thing for kind of the middle 40 minutes, overcame a slow start, really took control, and then the phrase I keep using, get up and let up. You cannot allow that to happen in either of these ball games, on the road at Syracuse or at home against Wake Forest. And I think one thing that worries me about Wake Forest, you've got a lot of at least national media saying, oh, Sam Hartman's gone. He's at Notre Dame now. Wake's not going to be what they used to be. And I would assume at least during Clemson week, you're also going to hear, oh, that mesh doesn't really work against top teams with a big, bold front seven. We just covered in these last two episodes how good Clemson's front seven is. Wes Goodwin seemed pretty prepared to stop the mesh part last year of the Wake Forest attack. they are going to have a decent passing attack with Mitch Griffiths. The games that Hartman missed early in the year, which is usually when it's toughest for a young guy like Griffiths to step in and make things happen, he did well. He acquitted himself. He impressed, and he showed that he's going to be able to lead this offense as well, make sure that it has balance. So everybody's got to be ready, top to bottom on that defense. And of course, the offense is going to have to execute well in order to outscore Wake Forest and maybe put a little distance in this game if the opportunity presents itself.
Yeah, you got to play a complete game. You do. I mean, to beat Wake Forest, and Clemson didn't do that last year, and then found a way to squeak one out. But
Yeah.
They will need to do that this year and be focused and be ready to go. And that leans on leadership, and we'll see what kind of leadership this team has. I think it's going to be really good. Again, it's been a quiet off season. You know how I feel about that. I've made that clear. I think that's a positive going into a season when there's not been a lot of off-field drama, not any problems in the locker room, arrests, any of that kind of stuff. I think that's a positive for this team going forward, and we'll see how that plays out, once the game starts.
Couple of games I am eager to see take place, really, just because they are always entertaining. And what do you hear during this playoff era? Oh, it's always a blowout, and I wish the ACC was more competitive. These ought to be two ACC games that will be pretty competitive, I think. And let's swing back now on linebackers and go talk about some of the commits that are coming in. We didn't do that. I do want to get into that. A very familiar name in Drew Woodaz, younger brother of Wade Woodaz out of the Tampa area, had originally been considered the higher ranked of the two prospects between him and his brother. Of course, Wade Woodaz has turned out to be so solid in so many ways that maybe Drew Woodaz isn't projected as that level of a player out of the gate anyway. And then an all-world talent out of Georgia, your home state, Sammy Brown, managed to pull him away from the Georgia Bulldogs, that was a very heated recruiting battle. Several Georgia commits were going to visit Sammy Brown, toss the ball around with him, according to some reports. But apparently he, unbeknownst to the rest of the world, was locked in with Clemson the whole time. And these two guys have a chance to really make things continue to be a strong linebacking school at Clemson.
They do, and I think that the Sammy Brown get is as big for Clemson in this class as there is, right? I mean, we've talked about some of the other misses on the offensive line. There's not a quarterback in the class, but getting Sammy Brown, I think, is huge for this defense moving forward. He's a really talented guy. I've seen him on TV a couple of times here in the state playing for Jefferson High School, and I think he just brings everything you want. We talked about Barrett Carter and Jeremiah Trotter. He is right along in that same line and will be a really good get for this program in this class. And then Woodaz, look, if he's what his brother is, then that's another, at least that. If he's the better one, then my goodness, if he's better than his brother, that's a good one as well. So it's a great start at linebacker in this class, and can't wait to see what those two guys bring, and if they add anybody else in the class as well.
Yeah, I mean, can you just imagine, Brown is a 5-star on some services, and you've got him next to Creighton, who is very highly regarded, next to Anderson, who also is very highly regarded, son of an NFL player, knows what it takes to get things done. Imagine those as a starting three, you're looking pretty good. And then you've got Woodaz able to move in wherever they need, meaning Wade, who projects to still be on the team for another year, maybe two. You would think Carter and Trotter are gone after this year. So if you're looking at a pair of Woodazes who hopefully are very similar in talent, backing up 3 spots among those guys, you're probably not talking as much 4-2-5 anymore with that bunch in the room, are you?
No, you're not, because there's talent, right? You're stacking talent, and I think elite talent. I mean, Clemson has been good at linebacker when we talk about this year's group. But in the past, I mean, they've had good linebackers. They were college linebackers. They weren't guys who really projected to the pros. James Skowski and Ben Boulware and those guys were great college players, but they didn't really project as NFL players. These guys project as NFL players. And I think that's what you're seeing, the recruiting really take another step at this position.
All right. Well, we will get into defensive backs in our next episode. Easy for me to say. We will also get into another couple of games and other positions in the upcoming episodes, working our way through the schedule, working our way around the two deep. If something happens with realignment, we will be sure to break in with an emergency episode or at least break through it on Twitter at Clemson Kickoff there. Best way to not miss an episode of the podcast is to subscribe on YouTube or follow us on your favorite podcast app. Check in with us on social media, not just Twitter. We're Instagram, we're Threads, we are Facebook at Clemson Kickoff. You can find us wherever you like to spend the most time scrolling and picking up your college football news and information. So until the next episode, I'm Bill Zimmerman.
I'm Daniel Shirley. Go Tigers.